Hello, everyone, and welcome to October's Career Advice Series webinar, Take Your Practice to the Next Level. Use knowledge management to maximize your productivity and business intelligence. I am Emily Roshek, Associate Director of the newly enhanced ABA Legal Career Central, a career center that offers a robust source of career development resources and connects legal professionals across all disciplines and career stages with employers offering career opportunities. Today's moderator is Catherine Sanders Reach, Director of Law Practice Management and Technology at the Chicago Bar Association. Catherine, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Emily, and welcome everyone. I hope it is bright and sunny where you are, as it is here in Chicago today, which is a wonderful fall day. So our speaker today, and I'm acting as moderator and going to help them out with questions, is Jack Bostelman, who's the president of KMJD Consulting in San Francisco. Jack has been a practicing lawyer for over 20 years in New York with Sullivan and Cromwell, and then became a consultant to lawyers helping firms with productivity and collaboration, especially at practice group levels. And he's also the chair of the Productivity and Knowledge Strategy Committee of the ABA's Law Practice Division, which if you're a Law Practice Division member, you should certainly join the committee. It's open to all. And Jack's contact information is here. So Jack, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everyone. Let me just cover a summary of the topics we're going to touch on today so you can get oriented. So, I think first we ought to start with explaining a little bit about what we mean by knowledge management, because it's a term that most people have heard by now, but it means so many different things to different people that I think it's important to clarify. And I also think it's important to explain why at least we think it's important. Then we're going to talk about specific things you can do in the knowledge management area in the context of your practice. And we're breaking it into two parts. One aimed at what you as an individual can do, and this is true for you whether you are a solo or whether you're in a small or even a large firm setting, just you and your own individual activities, kinds of things you can do. And then we're going to talk about some other things that as you start to be in a collaborative group, be that a small firm or a practice group in a larger firm, that you can do in the knowledge management area as well. Then we're briefly going to touch on the possible careers in this area, which would tend to be for larger firm practitioners, but we'll describe it when we get there, and point you to some resources for learning more. So let me just talk about knowledge management now, just to get you on the same page that I'm on. So we have a, next slide please, we have a conceptual I call it definition, but then I'll illustrate it more with examples, which is really, I think, the way to understand it. So knowledge management is all about retrieving and sharing what you know or what you've learned, either individually or as a group, about the work you do, the clients you serve, your firm itself as a business, and the markets for your services and the competition. So you'll note one thing that's not on that list is technology. We'll come to how that ties and doesn't tie to this area in a minute, but it's not buying some computer program that's going to do things for you. It's other stuff, and we'll get to that, what that stuff is in the rest of the program. So examples of what we mean are, checklists, whether it's checklists of content of an agreement, we're going to talk about that more later, or steps to do a task, whether it's a list of matters that you've worked on that you can then use for a variety of purposes, including finding precedents and fee benchmarking, whether it's the competitive landscape, what you've learned about competition so you can connect the dots. It's all that kind of stuff. And one of the core and first needs people have typically where they start is the first one, work product. Where can I find my stuff? So let's before we tell you how to do that, let's go to the next one. Why is it important? Well, you can sort of probably figure a lot of this out for yourself, but I want to be a little specific. So, of course, it makes you more efficient, and by that I mean delivering the same value to the client, because this is all about the client's perception in this part. by using either fewer hours or less expensive timekeepers pushing work down to more junior people. You also can, of course, achieve greater consistency and higher quality if you're reusing what you've learned before in the ways that we will describe. You can collaborate better with others more smoothly, and a byproduct there is getting the work faster to the client. And you'll just have a better time doing your job, so morale will be better. When I talk to people about this area and we sit down to brainstorm on what the needs are, which is one of the steps I often follow, the way I ask the question is, what would help you do your work more smoothly and more efficiently? And 90% of the answers that come back relate to what I would consider to be knowledge management related topics. So next slide, please. There's another reason that's a little more financially oriented about making money and why it helps you do that. There's a common misconception that why should a lawyer become more efficient because they bill by the hour? And the answer is it is still important to become more efficient, even though you bill by the hour. So the first reason is, in today's world, there are lots of pressures for fees and so on. So in many, many cases, you have write-downs and write-offs. And for those of you that aren't familiar with these sort of lawyer business accounting terms, a write-down is when you are getting ready to send the bill and you look at it and you say, oh, I can't charge this much. I need to make it smaller. The client won't accept this. I went off on a frolicking detour or took too much more time than I led the client to believe, or I just know the client's pain point, and I don't want to have to. I'd much rather cut now than have to argue with the client, cut it later. So I'll cut it now. That's a write-down. And a write-off is after you've sent the bill, the client comes back and says, I'm not going to pay the full amount for a variety of reasons, and you agree to accept a smaller amount. In either case, you did work, but you can't collect on it. So if you become more efficient, then, and this happens for a variety of reasons across a high percentage of matters. If you become more efficient, then you are producing the same amount of work, you're spending less time doing it, so you're going to have lower write-downs and write-offs. And then you're going to take this spare time and take on new work that pays you. So net-net, you make more money. Let's say you're fortunate enough to have none of these write-offs or write-downs, and the clients just pay your bills. Then, in this case, the fee for any particular client would go down if you became more efficient because it would take you less time. And that would certainly make the client happier, but how do you make yourself whole? Well, if you're so successful that you don't have write-offs and write-downs, then you probably have work in the pipeline you can take on. So you take on that new work with the time you saved, and you can run the math in formulas and stuff, but at the end of the day, you make exactly the same amount of money, but your fees are lower. Now, how good is that? And finally, if you're in a place where you don't have new work in the pipeline, but for some reason you don't have write-offs or whatever, you still need to do this because all your competitors, for all these reasons, are going to be reducing their fees. You're going to have to meet their fees. So what do? Just write more off as a result? Or do you become more efficient and then use that time to go prospect for more work? Anyway, quickly we'll do the next slide and then we'll move into the content of our presentation. The other 2 points I wanted to make are certainly if you charge flat fees, then becoming more efficient, the upside is all for you because you're still getting the same fee and now you have more time, you can take on more flat fee work. And as I said, this isn't about technology, it's about process. I recommend automation only after you have a process that works. Technology is expensive, both in terms of the buying of it, the maintaining of it, and the opportunity cost of installing it and living with it. So where you can, I recommend, at least for the start, until you prove that it works, use Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, PDFs, Outlook. Use the tools you already have and probably don't fully utilize anyway. So let's switch now to particular ideas on things you can do using these tools.
And Jack, before I move you on, we had a question from the audience that really kind of addresses the question of what is KM. And I also want to let the attendees know that the webinar handout is in fact available in the handouts tab on that little bar where the chat and questions are. There's a handouts. You can open it up and download this slide deck. But the question that came in, that kind of gets to the question of what is KM, the person says, this sounds like a form of law practice management. Can you discuss how the two areas and approaches are or can be connected?
Well, it is all part of one giant fabric. You know, law practice management can be maybe is broader. So maybe one example would be if you're trying to become more efficient, the two ways that I can think of to do it are, one is don't do the things the client doesn't care about. So that's not knowledge management really. That's kind of process improvement. You're not doing the things that you don't have to do, and that the client doesn't consider it valuable in terms of what they're paying you for. That's law practice management, but it's probably not KM. The other approach to becoming more efficient is to not reinvent the wheel every time. Have checklists, have other ways to draw on what you've done before so you can do it again more quickly. That's knowledge management. That's just one small example, but I think that the knowledge management would probably be a subset within the overall framework of law practice management, which is everything you might do.
Okay. All right. So we'll
I think we
start
should
out with some specifics, yeah?
Jump into checklists. And everything that this is in the group of our discussion related to things individuals can do. But as I pointed out at the beginning, your practice setting for this can be either as a solo or in a group situation. So these are things you can do on your own, but there are also things that you can readily see are the types of things that you can do as a group too. So bear that in mind. This division between individual and group activities that we're doing today is a little bit artificial. So, you know, I think checklists, if you're going to do one single thing or start somewhere, I would always recommend you start with checklists. Not knowing anything about you, I would always still say that, because checklists are so rich and can produce so much value, and you probably already have some, whether or not you call them that or not. So the types of things you can do with checklists are quite broad. One thing you can do is, instead of doing templates and standard forms, you can use a checklist. It has a number of advantages in many cases. So in this case, the checklist would be kind of like a table of contents for an agreement, except more detailed, with a description of what the issues are with respect to each provision, why you need it, the kinds of things that come up, what the variations might be, and links to samples of that provision. In some cases, many samples. In some cases, maybe you only need one. It's a lot easier to put together than a standard form. It's something you probably need to do conceptually if you're building a standard form, so it's a stepping stone that you have to do anyway. It's much easier to update. It still provides many, 80% of it. I would like to say it's 80% of the benefits with 20% of the work. You don't, it can be rough and still be usable, and you can add to it as you go, either as an individual or as a group. As you think of things, you can just jot it in there. A new issue that comes up or a new provision that needs to go in. You can, have these samples attached, so you can have something that you can start with, but you don't have to spend all this time producing something that's perfect, and it's going to end up changing and not really working for the next project anyway, unless you have some real cookie cutter thing. There's nothing wrong with forms in the right place, but they have to have a high reuse level to really be justified. Another kind of form, and you can make them online and do links and stuff instead of just Word documents, but that's kind of an enhancement. The basic fundamental thing is just get it down. Playbooks which is my term for process checklist, but basically it's a list of the steps to do something, whether it's the big picture, how to do a whole matter from beginning to end, or with maybe less detail on each piece, or a list of all the tiny little things you need to do. Either way, it's a process checklist, and it has wonderful benefits. By the way, on the benefit side, on an advantage that checklists have when you're doing a checklist instead of a form is, forms are great when you're producing it, but if someone else produced it and you have to review it, having your standard form to use as a tool isn't very helpful when you're reviewing somebody else's agreement. A checklist is great because it highlights the issues, and it helps you not overlook things that might have been left out, which is even an experienced reviewer looking at an agreement who may have many comments and things to say about what's there might not top of mind remember what's been left out, and a checklist will help you do that. So on the process side, of course, process checklists, malpractice insurers like them. It keeps you from leaving things out. Obviously, airline pilots do this. There's a good reason for that. There's no reason why lawyers shouldn't be using them too. It also helps when you're trying to bring others up to speed or have others do all or part of the work. You now have leveraged what you know by building a checklist, and you can give it to someone else, and then they can start doing it. The ultimate version of this is after you do the task, you update a status column as to where it stands, and you share this with the client. So it naturally can be morphed into something that's more versatile than simply something you use. Next slide, please. The examples of playbooks would be a conflicts check, or new business intake, or what to do when your client is sued. You first tell them to put a litigation hold on all their documents that might be relevant and emails. You call the insurance carrier. You take various steps that need to be done in a fairly short time frame. A checklist is great for something like that. There's a book that I am happy to recommend called Checklist for Lawyers. It's published by the ABA. There's a link here to it, and it's kind of a long, ugly link because I think the PDFs links aren't live, so we put the whole link here. But it's written by Dan Siegel, who maybe some of you have heard of, who is a small firm practitioner. It's aimed at small firms and solos. It has examples of checklists, and it's a very, very useful little book. Next slide, please.
And well, Jack, can I cut in here just a little bit because I'm kind of fascinated with technology and the use of in law practice. I just want to throw a couple of.
Can I just make a technical? I see there's people are saying they can't hear me.
I think there were two people. I didn't see any more.
All right.
Okay, and we're now having confirmation that some can.
All right. Well, then that's not me. Okay.
But in terms of when you're looking at developing checklists, one of the things is whether you're a sole practitioner, obviously you can keep the checklist. It's just for yourself. But as soon as you bring in anybody else to the game, you need to have it in a shareable format. And for that, I really love Microsoft's OneNote notebook. And Ben Shore wrote a book on OneNote for lawyers. There's lots of help guides, but basically this is a product that comes bundled with Office, Microsoft Office, called OneNote. And it's a really cool tool because it lets you associate Word documents, emails, Excel spreadsheets, other things, all with a OneNote notebook. So you can start a checklist there and then say, see best example document, and link it to the document on your server or on Dropbox or wherever you have it live. So OneNote Notebook's a pretty cool way to, I think, build a bunch of checklists with some context. And then, of course, there's things like the project management tools, which are kind of checklists on steroids, like Zoho Projects or Trello or Basecamp. So if you're looking for easy ways to find tools to be able to share this stuff and have people build it in real time, those are some of my examples.
I think that's very helpful, and the idea of using a collaborative tool like OneNote to build a checklist that each person who uses it adds to is a really good idea, because that's that you can't do that with standard forms, but checklists, wow, very powerful. Okay, let's talk about we're covering this kind of a smorgasbord of things, and you could do a whole webinar on some of these themselves. We're not going to do that today, so if we're not going as deep as you'd like, the resources at the end may be of interest to you. So another one it's pretty mundane, just to be frank about it, but it's incredibly important, is what I call a document naming convention. But basically, whenever you create a document, you should have a system for how you name it. And I'll talk a minute about what I think that system should be. But the idea is, when you or anyone that you may be collaborating with are looking for the document again, how are you going to find it? And word searches and all of that may be good for some things, but it's not a very efficient way to find documents, frankly. Oftentimes it's a document exists and a few things about it. So if you're consistent and have a system for how you name it, you can do keyword searches on the file name. And this is true whether you are storing the document locally on your computer or on a shared server drive, or in some fancy document management system that your firm has, if you're in a larger firm. It's applicable in all those scenarios. So the idea is that you come up with a system where, I just made one up here. You got to do one that works for the way your matters work and the way you work. But start with client name, matter name, year, type of matter, and maybe type of document, and put that in the title. And then when you're looking for documents of the same type, you can do a keyword search on the type of document or a particular time frame. And you can't rely on the computer's timestamp for files, because that's based on when you put it in there, but it might be an agreement or a document that has a different original date, and you want that original date to be in there. You might have author. Again, author isn't going to be something the computer is going to be able to tell you, because that's going to be who actually physically stored it, not necessarily who wrote it. But you might have the parties on the other side. It depends. And you might decide you're going to have a different little system depending on the type of matter or the type of document. And that's all fine. I would just say, don't get too exotic, don't get too fancy, err on the side of being simple, because it's way more important to be consistent every time you do this, and you're always going to be in a hurry, so it needs to be easy. Never put more than 4 to 6 pieces of information in the title would be my advice. Make a cheat sheet that you keep by your desk, and that anyone else who's working with you and has to use this system keeps by their desk, so that you're constantly being reminded. Try to use the same keywords to mean the same thing. So whether it's a merger agreement or a plan and agreement of merger and reorganization, just call it a merger agreement for type of document. That way you'll be able to find it. Use the same abbreviations for client names or cities or other things that repeat. Use the same initials. And I think we can go to the next slide. The counterpart to this is, to naming your documents, is also your folder system for storing. And while I think it's pretty easy and intuitive, and most people probably do this already, to have your system organized by client and then matter, within the matter, you ought to have standardized subfolders. And maybe those can vary by type of matter too. Or maybe you sometimes use some and not all, but you ought to have a list, and it ought to be consistent so that you know which folder to be looking in for which type of document. And again, this applies whether you're using your computer file system or a network file system, or whether you have a document management system that's matter-centric, which organizes things by matter, which is the way they generally work these days. You still need to create these subfolders and include them on your cheat sheet. Okay, next slide.
I wanted to add,
interject something.
Yeah, Just a thought on the folder naming convention, and I frankly haven't used a document management system in real life since I won't say what year, but one of the products that I've been messing around with recently called Citrix ShareFile, which is it's similar to a Dropbox but much more sophisticated, better security. One of the things I found that it will do is let you create a standard folder subfolder structure template so that when you go add a new matter, you just drop in that folder structure, and I'm sure other products give that option. May be a little harder to find, but I bet it's there. The other thing is if you're just in a regular Windows Explorer environment, you can create a set of folders and subfolders that have nothing in them and put it kind of in a place where they can just be copied over to start a matter. So you don't have to create these over and over again. You can create a little template of your folder and subfolder structures. That was
very
my
helpful.
thought.
Very helpful. Good idea. Saves time. So on the subject of folders, in addition to having your client files, you ought to have a subject matter system that needs to be organized according to what subjects are relevant to your practice. But you need to create a list of subjects and with some sub-subjects under those. Again, balance complexity, which will be hard to remember, with not being with having enough granularity so that it's useful. And this will be a living thing. You'll be adding to it as you go, and you may end up reorganizing it at some point. But that should also be in a separate folder system, either in a shared drive if you're collaborating with others or on your computer. And in it, you ought to put in substantive writing like CLE material or current articles. You ought to put in the various precedents and good examples that you know you're going to again. And I'll make two kind of technical recommendations here. One is, don't have a paper file and an electronic file. Just keep it electronic. If you get a bunch of paper, scan it as a PDF. Make sure that it's a searchable PDF, so it has an OCR, invisible OCR layer that the computer can search on, and include that in this subject matter system as well. Don't have it off in a paper folder somewhere. And also, if you're including precedents or example documents or other documents that live primarily in the client files, instead of copying them and including them here, include a pointer, a clone, an alias. Depends on whether you're using Windows or Mac, what it's called. But it's basically, it operates as though it's a file, but it's really just a pointer to where the file really lives. And it behaves like a file, so you can, a document, so you put it where you want it in the subject matter system, but when someone clicks on it, they get the original document. And so it's got whatever changes have occurred since you created this pointer. Now, if for some reason you want the static version, then by all means create a copy and put it in there, then it won't change. But if you're trying to point to the latest living version, then this would be the better way to do it. And keep a copy of the index available, whether you keep it in paper or on your desktop, on your monitor desktop. Just keep it handy so that when you go to look for something, you can find it. Let's switch gears and move to the next idea. Next slide there. So the next one is, applicable to you as an individual. It's also applicable to groups. And this is basically putting a list together of all the matters you've worked on, but not just a list of the matters, other information about the matters that will be the kind of information you want to know when you're trying to find a group of matters that are similar. So that, for example, and the reason you might want to do that are many. One, you might be pitching to a client and you want to show your expertise either in a particular industry or a particular type of matter and how many you've done. So you need a list. You don't want to go rummaging through your files. You just want to be able to push a button and have a list. You may need to figure out what fee you should estimate or propose if you're doing a fixed fee, or just an estimate, and how do you do that? Well, maybe you look at the matters that you've done before that are similar. So you might be doing it for that. You might, if you work with other people, you might want to be able to find someone who's worked on this kind of matter before, so you can bat around questions and so on. Or someone more junior who's worked on one who you can recruit to help you, so you don't have to train the person from the beginning on this type of matter. So all those cases require a list, and it requires a bunch of information about each item on the list that would be enough to narrow it down to be similar enough for the purpose you're using. So these kinds of factors you need to figure out on your own. Again, like my general rule, not too many. Much better to be consistent with a few than inconsistent with many, or have people not be doing it. I would say,
Jag, somebody
out, go on.
Oh no, go ahead and finish that thought, and we had a question.
Okay, well, so just to finish the thought, I would say do this on a spreadsheet. Just build a spreadsheet, whether it's a group spreadsheet or an individual spreadsheet. Don't invest in some fancy stuff until you find that your list is actually working and you're building it and people are contributing to it. That was the end of my thought.
Okay, and the question was, and it kind of goes back to our previous point, was the person is asking, are you advocating for a completely paperless system? And if so, what do you do with the paper after you OCR the document? If I may pitch a CLE that we just completed for the ABA's Law Practice Division, which I believe is in the archives. We did a whole program on paperless, and we talked a lot about what do you do with the paper after you've scanned it in. I will just on that point say that that's a record retention issue, and it depends on the type of document that you've scanned, whether or not you need to keep a print copy or not. I think for your context, though, Jack, what are you thinking?
Oh, well, I was thinking much more simple. I was not trying to step into the whole paperless office thing, and I agree with everything you just said. This was just on the question of your subject matter index is let's just keep it one place you have to look and not have it in two places. And so whether you keep the original or not, since this is completely discretionary stuff, it's just, you came back from a CLE with a bunch of handouts. You can keep the handouts or not. Depends, I suppose, on whether you want to have a portable version to carry around with you in paper or not. It's completely up to you.
Okay.
That was my thinking there. So let's move on to the next one. So now I'm going to talk about a few things that tend to be more. There were reasons why I want to talk about them in the context of collaboration groups, because they are maybe trickier in that context or more important in that context. So the first one is establishing remote access to files that are secure. This is not something that you, unless you're a solo, this is not something that you as an individual are going to have a unilateral right to do. Typically, if you're in a firm, it's going to have its own rules on how remote access works. And so what I'm about to say is speaking to the group that decides what the rules are. So, but the needs for having remote access to your files, which I listed here quickly, are, I think consistent, whatever the context is, which is you want something that automatically synchronizes across all your devices. It needs to have you in control of encryption, not the vendor, if you're going to put any client-related files there, because most people have concluded that if the vendor has the encryption key, they aren't comfortable that that satisfies the requirement that they keep their client confidences away from third parties. You want to be sure that there's appropriate backup, and you want to be sure that there's it's like backup to the backup. If the vendor blows up or something, goes out of business, you don't want to be stuck. You want to be sure you have local copies as well. And it would be nice if it had some collaboration features too. So there probably are, Catherine, I think, is going to have some thoughts on this as well. But there are many, many products that do all these things. Dropbox is not one of them, in my opinion. It's free, it's ubiquitous, and a lot of people still use it, but by itself, I don't think it achieves all of these requirements, certainly the encryption key requirement. But there are add-ons and others that work very similarly that do achieve it. You know, this I suppose is an example in response to the earlier question about something that's maybe a little bit more practice management oriented and a little less KM oriented, but it certainly can improve your efficiency and your quality control greatly if you can do this the right way. Catherine, you want to add something?
Sure. Well, and I agree that it's funny. I work in an environment where we have a shared drive, and everybody can upload documents to the shared drive, and yet my partner in crime here at my job and I keep everything in a box folder. One, because I have access to it remotely without having to use a VPN client, and two, because the search is better. So,
yeah, no, I mean, convenience usually wins.
Yeah, so somebody had just asked about Box. I love Box, but the vendor does have key access in that pretty much the way to make a determination whether if it's easy to change your password, the vendor probably has a copy of it. But I disagree with Jack on the need to not have a zero knowledge system. It's really dependent, I think, on what kind of documents you're keeping in the file, and the terms of service and reputation of the vendor you're storing with. Dropbox for free. The terms of service alone should give you pause to store anything that's client related there. From an ethics perspective, you've also got specific legislation, specifically data breach, HIPAA, and some others that you have to think about. Is the data that I'm storing with this vendor also protected by these laws? And then that's going to help determine how tight the security that you're going to be looking for in a sort of shared environment online. But so for one, like if you want a completely zero knowledge online storage, Spider Oak is out there. That said, you have to break the encryption to do collaboration. So it's kind of, it's not always perfect. You don't get perfect security and perfect usability. So that it's a kind of a weighing out of what your needs are. Things that if you're using Box or Google Drive or OneDrive or things like that, and I actually, again, with Dropbox and Google Drive for the free products, read the terms of service and think about it in terms of clients and confidentiality. I think you'll want to pay for them. But if you want to encrypt things and you are the one who holds the key, you can use third-party tools like Sookasa, that's Sookasa, or Boxcryptor, which is Boxcryptor. Those kinds of products will let you encrypt files on your local drive before you send them to the cloud. So if there's a folder that you're going to keep that has client information that also includes personal information like social security numbers, things like that, you probably want to add some extra encryption. If you're dealing personal injury work, med-mal, or anything that deals with hospital records, then you're probably going to want to make sure that what you're working with is HIPAA compliant, and that you may have to sign be able to get them to sign a business associate agreement to work with them. So, and then I'm even seeing encryption, third-party encryption tools for practice management products like Clio. There's a group out on the market out of Canada called CloudMask, where they're actually encrypting the data that you're storing in Clio so that Clio can't even see it. So, you know, this is an emerging area, I think, but ultimately having your files in the cloud and searchable and shareable and accessible makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Catherine. I agree with what you said. I mean, deciding the extent to which you have to focus on encryption is driven by the client files and your ethical responsibilities. And if you're putting up non-client stuff or other non-sensitive stuff, then you have less worries in that area, less requirements to worry about in that area. So let's go to the next slide then. I put the email and contacts management thing in the group collaboration part of this discussion because it just gets so much more complex when you're working in a group context. But it really applies to everybody. We all know, email is a huge challenge in multiple dimensions. And the dimension that I'm focusing on for this discussion is the question of, capturing and retrieving the content of emails. There's a whole problem of how do you deal with them during your day and how do you, become more efficient at handling them, etc. But some simple ideas, and this one is one that's not susceptible to, simple approaches. And everyone's email problems are usually a mix of many problems. And so my advice in general is try to sit back or talk to people about the particular challenges they have in, well, why don't you file your emails according to our policy, our office policy? Find out why. Well, because the software is so clumsy, it takes me like 5 minutes to do that, and I don't have time. So this is an area where I would start right away to think about whether you have the right software. Software, at least in terms of archiving and sharing and making it easy to hit a button to file and have it auto-learn the file client matter numbers based on the email addresses and so on. Can save a lot of time, and that will definitely help with people storing it in the right way. There's some other things you can do. I would advocate having separate email folders for each client matter. Consider using the features that Outlook and some of the other email clients have that let you automatically color code the subject line for emails so that depending on who the sender is or whatever, so you can find certain emails for certain clients or certain subjects more quickly. Speaking of subjects, when you're trying to, this is analogous, this is the email analog to the document naming thing. Subject lines are actually important for retrieving emails, because if you have a long list of emails or you want to do a keyword search, either scrolling through or keyword searching, what's in that subject line is going to make a lot of difference to whether you can find it or not. And we all are guilty of having an email chain where over the life of the chain, the subject of the discussion evolves, and the email subject line no longer has anything to do with what the content of the email is. Every time you reply or send an email, you should look at the subject line and decide whether it's still relevant to the content of your email. And if it's not, you should change it. And you can change it on a reply, you can change it on a new email or whatever, or just start a new chain. That way, you'll have a much better chance of finding it. I also think from a purely, usability standpoint, both as to the email process itself, but also as to be able to find the content that you need in an email quickly. Try to write your emails the way a news article is written. Put the most important thing first. What do I want you to do when you read this email? I need you to call me. I need you to concur with my analysis, whatever. I'm sending this for your information. Don't leave it at the end, because a lot of people don't get to the end, and then you're going to waste time on the process. I think that that's about all I'm going to try to say about email in the time we have today. We could have a whole seminar on that, but just a few quick ideas. I think on the subject of contacts, just the next slide. I think it's the rare case where you would be able to use contact management software effectively, because it requires too much time at the time you put in each contact to put in information about the contact and fill out the various fields. They're incredibly powerful and useful when they work. I use one, but it's a lot of work that I don't think most people are going to do. But there are some shortcuts you can do. If you use Outlook, it has a categorization feature. You can attach categories to contacts, and you can develop your own system for what the categories are, depending on how you may need to try to retrieve them. It could be by subject matter of interest, or nature of client, or any number of ways. I also encourage you to add little notes to each contact, and stuff as simple as you're talking on the phone and your client mentions something about their kids or their birthday or something personal. Jot it down. You may not remember it next time you talk to them, but if you see that little note, you might find a way to work it in, and it makes a huge difference in your relations with people to be able to do that. Or anything else that you think you might find useful in the future in the notes field. It's very useful. There is software, of course, also that will help you share your contacts with your firm mailing list and so on, and those are worthwhile to investigate too. I'm not making particular recommendations here, but Catherine may have some thoughts on this subject she wants to share with us too.
Actually, I don't.
Okay, then.
Except, in terms of, there's some legal specific CRMs out there. There's contact managers. There's practice management software that'll collect your contacts and let you search for conflicts. But I guess I completely agree that you need to make your contacts smart contacts, which means going beyond just the email address, phone numbers, and the relationship to the particular matter, but also things like if you're trying to pull together a list for a marketing mailing, wouldn't it be nice if you had also added intelligence like this is a client, this is a potential client, this is a former client, this is an influencer, this is a colleague, so in addition to just the actual contact information that you can add, gives you a better chance of pulling that back out. I literally had a conversation with a lawyer just this week about he wanted to send an email just to some of his LinkedIn contacts that had second languages because he had written an article in a second language. LinkedIn doesn't have that kind of intelligence. So I said you should be linking, pulling your LinkedIn contacts into whatever your contact management is and adding that information so you can run a report and push it out through MailChimp or whatever you're doing. So the other little tip that I'll throw out is you have to get the contacts in there in the first place. And sometimes that in and of itself is a challenge unless it's a client. And so I've been using this product that works with Gmail and Outlook, and it's called EverContact. It's really slick. It's free. There is a fee-based option that you can use to import contacts from the last 5 years of your email. But basically what it does is anybody who sends you an email with a signature block, it takes all the information out of the signature block and pushes it into your contacts at a field level. So it's like magic, and it's the best thing for having me get beyond just having someone's email address and actually having their phone number and all of those other things. So it's a great start, and it's free, and it's very, seamless in use.
That sounds great. Let's move on in our last few minutes. A couple more things to suggest. One other idea in the knowledge management area is, of course, you need to stay current with what's happening. And if you work in a group or with a group, then you have a lot of ways you can help each other in this regard. So first of all, you ought to be meeting and talking periodically in a kind of a formal way, not just casually around lunch or something. But it can be at lunch, but it ought to be not because you ran into each other, but the group as a whole ought to have a specific schedule of when they meet to talk about what they're going to talk about, and then you ought to have a sort of a protocol for how you conduct your meeting. You ought to talk about developments in the law in your area. You ought to talk about business development type activity. You ought to talk about your current matters. And whether you do this weekly or monthly, it depends on what the dynamics of the group are and the need to talk. Sometimes you might have a weekly meeting to talk about where things stand and staffing and so on, that you then periodically have an add-on component where you talk about developments in the law or in the industry that people ought to know about, because everyone learns things that might be useful to others. Along the way, you ought to develop a culture that if there's some new development that happens, one of you sends an email around to the others. Or to a central person who's in charge of distributing it to the others, so that maybe there aren't two people doing the same thing at the same time. You ought to be making an effort to attend bar association meetings and other substantive meetings about your field, and you ought to do it in an organized way so that one person who's going either because they want to go or because they were asked to go by the rest of the group brings something back to share with the others. So I would think it would include bring materials back, actually try and take some notes that would be useful to your colleagues, and actually talk to your colleagues at the next group meeting about what you learned and what you heard. And then you get, you've magnified your attendance to your whole group at that point. Also, you should be trying to subscribe to where they exist and where the price makes sense to you, to electronic newsletters, or consider using news aggregator software. Some of the challenges in that area are trying to set the algorithms so that it sends to you news that's almost always relevant to you, because if it's 10% of what it sends you is interesting and the rest is not, you're going to pretty quickly just stop reading it altogether. If you have a library, if you're in a firm where you have a library, this is an area where you ought to be talking to your librarian, because they're way better than the lawyers at doing that kind of stuff. Catherine, I don't know if you have any add-ons to this one.
Well, as a librarian, I completely agree that they are excellent content curators, and I know that some firms have actually brought librarians on who they are engaged at the beginning of a new matter to create content that's pushed to the attorneys relevant to that matter and the subjects of law that it's going to pertain to, and push that out through a portal or to the individual attorneys in a practice group. So that's a good suggestion if you have a librarian. If you don't, there are ways to targeted content. One I really like is JD Supra. You can go in and get context-based, or not context-based, but keyword-based content sent to you, and also get new updates from different jurisdictions at a fairly granular level. The other thing is,
JD Supra is the one that collects the memos from many, many, many firms and then organizes them by topic, right?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. That's JD Supra. Justia is the one I'm thinking about. So actually, I did a program for this, the Career Center, that should be archived, and I went over tons of these resources. It's a free download, I think, and Emily can come back at the end and tell us where
it's a free download.
Okay, so I actually went through tons of these different resources that you can avail yourself of for free. And then I would suggest using something like Evernote to collect all the content. So the thing with web stuff is that marking it's almost impossible, and you can't remember where you saw it. So you need to aggregate and push all that content in a place that you can search it, which kind of goes along with the KM theory.
Excellent. Okay, we got one more in this group, and then one more at the end, and then we're done. We only have 5 minutes left. I think we've been answering our questions as we go, so we haven't set aside a separate Q&A, but if you've got questions, shoot them in now, and we'll cut short what we're going to talk about and turn to the questions. One thing that I have this as an advanced thing because it's so unusual for people to do it, but it's so beneficial, so I can't not tell you about it, which is doing lessons learned sessions. At the end of a matter, and if you're a solo, you can actually do it with yourself, but if you're in a group, it's even more important to do it. But you sit down, and you take a deep breath, you meet all as a group, you spend 15 or 20 minutes, you have a little checklist of the things you're going to talk about, and it's like the whole objective is, what did we learn when we were doing this that we should or shouldn't do in the next one? Every other profession does this as a matter of routine. Lawyers are just beginning to do it. But you ask, did we get the outcome that we wanted? Did the schedule work the way it was supposed to? Was the client happy about what we did. You know, maybe you got a great outcome, but we didn't do a good job keeping the client apprised of developments along the way. Well, okay, that's something maybe we should do better so we get credit for our good result. You know, did we have the right people working on this? Did someone end up spending too much time because they were learning? And is that a good thing anyway because now they know, or was it a bad decision in that context? How did we do on our budget? If we had, did we have a budget? And then you note the conclusions on all these things, and then find a way to share them with the rest of the group you're working in, the rest of the firm or the practice group that works together. And you do that in an anonymized way so that individual names are not used, but it's here's what we learned. And maybe you share it in two ways. One, you have a little bit of notes from this meeting and you put it in some place that people can look at, electronic place. But I think more importantly, you know, periodically, maybe once a quarter at one of these group meetings, you go through the lessons learned for the last period since you last did it. And the whole idea is to institutionalize what you learned that you want to do better the next time, or what you learned that was great that you want to be sure everybody does because it worked so well. It's a perfect blend of knowledge management and practice management to do this. Okay, next slide. So, you know, this is a careers program, and the way that I see, next slide please, the way I see careers in this field tends to be in the large firm setting. And, you know, the careers are involved, is a job typically called knowledge management attorney or practice support lawyer, but it involves, you know, promoting the kinds of things I talked about, doing a lot of the legwork, selling it to the lawyers, helping them set it up, and sometimes if you're in a large firm, you know, they'll buy a large piece of software, and there's the whole process of configuring it so it works the way it works for the lawyers and piloting it and so on. And those kinds of things also tend to be the things that this kind of person would do. You know, it's a staff position. It's not a lawyer job, although typically you have to be a lawyer to get this kind of a job, have to have been a practicing lawyer. But it has regular hours, commensurate compensation. It's, you know, because it requires former lawyers, it pays pretty well, but you're not on the same, you know, not like a partner track at a big firm. You don't have interface with clients typically. You might go to some meetings, but you're not doing client work. And but you're working with the lawyers every day. Next slide. The typical requirements for this kind of a job are that you have 1 to 5 years experience at a large firm, and that you have the kind of personality and general approach that involves taking initiative and communicating well, because, you know, lawyers are always going to be distracted and busy doing their client work, and they're not going to want to take time to invest time to become more efficient, even though in the long run it pays off handsomely. You're going to have to get in there and do that. The very common scenario is that someone who used to be a practicing lawyer at the firm switches over to do this, and they have the existing relationships and so on that make it very helpful, and they're typically going to support an area that's broader than their own expertise, but having had the experience at that firm or another large firm is considered to be invaluable. We're out of time, and I just want to give you a brief sense of where you can go to learn some more. There are many places to go, but the ones I'm going to point to, you'll understand why I'm picking them. And these, of course, the handouts are posted now, so you can get these links and so on there. But there's, as was mentioned at the beginning, there's a Productivity and Knowledge Strategy Committee in the Law Practice Division. It's free to join if you're a Law Practice Division member. You can join the Law Practice, if you're an ABA member but not a Law Practice member, you can join Law Practice for free for 1 year using the link here, and thereafter it's $50 more. Once you're in LP, you can join our committee for free. I happen to be the chair of the committee, so I'm plugging it here. But we have a number of resources. One is we have a white paper on topics top strategies for solo and smaller firms in the knowledge management area. There's a link here to a free summary that's accessible to anyone. To get the whole paper, you got to be a member of our committee. Next slide. We also have done a webinar series last year on some of them drilling down on the subjects we talked about today on knowledge management. We always pitched it towards both a large firm and small and solo, so there's something in there for everyone. They're half hour, they're archived, the website is on the slide. We're going to start another schedule this season to be posted soon, and it's open to everyone, no ABA membership required. Are there any questions we should answer, or are we out of time now?
So I think we're good. If anybody has any last minute questions, we're past time, but I don't think it's going to cut off on us quite yet. And otherwise, let me pull up our contact information here. Oops, it's not there. It should be in the handout, and the handout to the in response to the question just asked, if you're looking in the GoToWebinar panel, there's a panel that shows how to connect via online and how to connect via the phone and all that stuff. In there, there's a tiny little one that says handouts. If you click on the plus sign, it will show you that there's the KM webinar handout in a PDF. You can click on that. It'll download on your machine. That's going to give you links that are in the slide deck that we just showed, specifically the ones for the committees and the webinars and things like that. So I think we are out of time and all done with questions. Again, if you download the handouts, our contact information is in there if you need to ask Jack or myself any additional questions. And I'll turn it back over to Emily.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Jack. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. For attendees, you can check out the ABA Legal Career Central's redesigned mobile-friendly website at abalcc.org. That's where you'll be able to find upcoming and past webinars in this series. This is the Career Advice Series. One of the webinars that Catherine was referring to is on that website under the Career Advice Series tab. And also our next one is it's called Power Up Your LinkedIn Profile. It's taking place on Friday, November 11th at 1 p.m. Eastern. So please remember to mark your calendars, and you can also feel free to check out our job board at jobs.americanbar.org. Thank you all, and have a great day.